And I think going back to my viewpoint is if you believe we're in this sort of stage of economic growth and change that we've been in for the last 20 years, the export controls are absolutely guaranteeing that China will win long term, right? If you do not believe AI is going to make significant changes to society in the next 10 years or 5 years, right? Five-year timelines are sort of what the more executives and such of AI companies and even big tech companies believe. But even 10-year timelines, it's reasonable. But once you get to, hey, these timelines are below that time period, then the only way to sort of like create a sizable advantage or disadvantage for America versus China is if you constrain compute, because talent is not really something that's constraining, right? China arguably has more talent, right? More STEM graduates, more programmers. The US can draw upon the world's people, which it does. There's tons of, foreigners in the AI industry.
So many of these AI teams are all people without it, so China cannot make or get cutting edge chips. And the idea is that if you time this wrong, China is pouring a ton of money into their chip production. And if you time it wrong, they are going to have more capacity for production, more capacity for energy, and figure out how to make the chips and have more capacity than the rest of the world to make the chips, because everybody can buy, they're going to sell their Chinese chips to everybody. They might subsidize them. And therefore, if AI takes a long time to become differentiated, we've kneecapped the financial performance of American companies. NVIDIA can sell less. TSMC cannot sell to China. So therefore, we have less demand to keep driving the production cycle. So that's the assumption behind the timing being
less
important.
than 10 years or 5 years to above, right? China will win because of these restrictions long term unless AI does something in the short term, which I believe AI will do, make massive changes to society in the medium short term, right? And so that's the big unlocker there.
In the world, they're still going to have those GPUs. They're still going to be able to train models. But if there's going to be a huge market for AI, if you have strong export controls and you want to have 100,000 GPUs just serving the equivalent of ChatGPT clusters with good export controls, it also just makes it so that AI can be used much less. And I think that is a much easier goal to achieve than trying to debate on what AGI is. And if you have these extremely intelligent autonomous AIs in data centers, like those are the things that could be running in these GPU clusters in the United States, but not in China.
To some extent, training a model does effectively nothing, right? Like,
Yeah.
great, I have a model. The thing that Dario is sort of speaking to is the implementation of that model once trained to then create huge economic growth, huge increases in military capabilities, huge increases in productivity of people, betterment of lives, whatever you want to direct super powerful AI towards, you can. But that requires a significant amounts of compute, right? And so the US government has effectively said, and it does. There's tons of, foreigners in the AI industry.
So many of these AI teams are all people without a US passport.
I mean, and many of them are Chinese people who are moving to America, right? And that's great. That's exactly what we want, right? But there's that talent is one aspect, but I don't think that's one that is a measurable advantage for the US or not. It truly is just whether or not compute, right? Now, even on the compute side, when we look at chips versus data centers, right? China has the unprecedented ability to build ridiculous sums of power. Clockwork, right? They're always building more and more power. They've got steel mills that like individually are the size of the entire US industry, right? And they've got aluminum mills that consume gigawatts and gigawatts of power, right? And when we talk about what's the biggest data center, right? OpenAI made this huge thing about Stargate, their announcement there. That's like once it's fully built out in a few years, it'll be 2 gigawatts, right? Of power, right? And this is still smaller than the largest, industrial facilities in China, right? China, if they wanted to build the largest, industrial facilities in China, right? China, if they wanted to build the largest data center in the world, if they had access to the chips, could. So it's just a question of when, not if, right?
So their industrial capacity far exceeds the United States?
Exactly.
To the manufacture stuff.
Yeah.
So why? So long term, they're going to be manufacturing chips there.
Chips are a little bit more specialized. I'm specifically referring to the data centers, right? Fabs take huge amounts of power. Don't get me wrong. That's not necessarily the gating factor there. The gating factor on how fast people can build the largest clusters today in the US is power, right? It is whether it's now it could be power generation, power transmission, substations, and all these sorts of transformers and all these things. Building the data center, these are all constraints on the U.S. industry's ability to build larger and larger training systems, as well as deploying more and more inference compute.
I think we need to make the point clear on why the time is now for people that don't think about this, because essentially with export controls, you're making it so China cannot.
So that's the big unlocker there. And even today, right? If Xi Jinping decided to get quote unquote scale pilled, right? I.e. decide that scaling laws are what matters, right? Just like the U.S. executives like Satya Nadella and Mark Zuckerberg and Sundar and all these U.S. executives of the biggest, most powerful tech companies have decided they're scale pilled and they're building multi-gigawatt data centers, right? Whether it's in Texas or Louisiana or Wisconsin, wherever it is, they're building these massive things that cost as much as their entire budget for spending on data centers globally in one spot, right? This is what they've committed to for next year, year after, et cetera. And so they're so convinced that this is the way, that this is what they're doing. But if China decided to, they could do it faster than us. But this is where the restrictions come in. It is not clear that China as a whole has decided, from the highest levels that this is a priority. The U.S. sort of has, right? You see Trump talking about DeepSeek and Stargate within the same priority. The U.S. sort of has, right? You see Trump talking about DeepSeek and Stargate within the same week, right? So and the Biden admin as well had a lot of discussions about AI and such. It's clear that they think about it. Only just last week did DeepSeek meet the second in command of China, right? Like they have not even met the top, right? They haven't met Xi. Xi hasn't set down, and they only just released a subsidy of 1 trillion RMB, roughly $160 billion, which is closer to the spending of like Microsoft and Meta and Google combined, right, for this year. So it's like they're realizing it just now. But that's where the export restrictions come in and say, hey, you can't ship the most powerful U.S. chips to China. You can ship a cut down version. You can't ship the most powerful chips to all these countries who we know are just going to rent it to China. You have to limit the numbers, right?
And the tools.
So and same with manufacturing equipment, DPU. Tools, all these different aspects. But it all stems from AI, and then what downstream can slow them down in AI. And so the entire semiconductor
and cost are on par with our expectations, as we stated. OpenAI O3 Mini is indeed a great model, but it should be stated that DeepSeek R1 has similar performance on benchmarks, is still cheaper, and it reveals its chain of thought reasoning, which O3 Mini does not. It only shows a summary of the reasoning. Plus, R1 is open weight, and O3 Mini is not. By the way, I got a chance to play with O3 Mini, and anecdotal vibe check wise, I felt that O3 Mini, specifically O3 Mini High, is better than R1. Still, for me personally, I find that Claude Sonnet 3.5 is the best model for programming, except for tricky cases where I will use O1 Pro to brainstorm. Either way, many more better AI models will come, including reasoning models, both from American and Chinese companies. Yeah, I mean, I see a use case for that. So yeah, I guess the benefit would be in the products themselves, which is why OpenAI is in a trickier position because
all of the value of OpenAI right now as a brand is in ChatGPT. Yeah. And there is actually not that, for most users, there's not that much of a reason that they need OpenAI to be spending billions and billions of dollars on the next best model when they could just license Llama 5 and for be way cheaper. So that's kind of like ChatGPT is an extremely valuable entity to them. but they could make more money just off that than
the chat application is clearly like does not have tons of room to continue, right? Like the standard chat, right, where you're just using it for random questions and stuff, right? The cost continues to collapse. V3 is the latest
go down
one,
to ads.
Biggest, but it's going to get supported by ads, right? Like as Llama, Meta already serves 405B, probably loses the money, but at some point, they're going to get. The models are going to get so cheap that they can just serve them for free with ad supported, right? And that's what Google is going to be able to do. And that's obviously they've got a bigger reach, right? So So anyways, Stargate, it's basically right. Like there is, it's a table about cost. There, you passed it already. It's that one. So this table is kind of explaining what happens, right? So Stargate is in Abilene, Texas, the first $100 billion of it. That site is 2.2 gigawatts of power in, about 1.8 gigawatts of power consumed, right? Per GPU, they have like roughly, Oracle is already building the first part of this before Stargate came about. To be clear, they've been building it for a year. They tried to rent it to Elon, in fact, right? But Elon was like, it's too slow. I need it faster. So then he went and did his Memphis thing. And so OpenAI was able to get it with this like weird joint venture called Stargate. They initially signed a deal with just Oracle for the first section of this cluster, right? This first section of this cluster, right, is roughly $5 billion to $6 billion of server spend, right? And then there's another billion or so of data center spend. But